But this supremacy of life assertion and self-assertion means that even truth itself must be subjugated to this.
Absolutely.
If there are truths that would damage us, that in other words would damage our lives, then we don't want to know them.
You see, we're back again at the question of the entitlement to truth, or at what he once called the hygiene of knowledge. There ought to be some kind of hygiene that would tell us what kind of knowledge we may face and what kind of knowledge we should reject. And you're quite right, that truth itself, in that way, is subjected to this kind of embargo, to this kind of sanction that he puts forward.
Well, one sees absolutely how this is flat contrary to all moralities that have actually existed. Would it be true to say that Nietzsche's defense, if he deigned to defend himself against criticism, would have been to say something like this? But look, the whole of civilization, humanity itself, if you like, the whole evolutionary process, has consisted of the strong eliminating the weak, the able eliminating the unable, the intelligent eliminating the stupid. And it's only because these processes have gone on perpetually over millions of years that we have any civilization at all, that we have any humanity at all. These things have created value.
Yes, I think that is precisely what he says, and what he would say on a number of occasions, different contexts, and his worry about the future is precisely that this kind of thing will not go on, that the democratic spirit, the spirit of the plebs, of the rabblement will take over and will annihilate all these values.
That it will put into reverse the very process that has actually created civilization out of barbarism.
But in addition to that, I think we have to bear in mind that he has a view of history which is really rather different from the view on which your analysis was based. He sees history as repeating itself. Now, what that means, we shall talk about that a little later, but what it essentially means is this, that any historical situation can create and absorb and make use of the highest that man is capable of creating. There aren't any privileged situations. There are no privileged eras. And therefore, any era that sees itself as capable of fully understanding, of fully creating these values, should be allowed to do that. And the trouble is that the late 19th century, the early 20th century, may very well be what he calls eras of decadence, in which this strength cannot be fully realized.
Now, your mention of his doctrine that history repeats itself brings me to what I would like to think of as the next stage in our discussion. When one comes to regard Nietzsche's later work, there are four big themes in it. And again, I think for clarity's sake, it will help if we take them one at a time. One is what you might summarize under the phrase, the will to power, a phrase which he has popularized. One is the Übermensch, or translated as the Superman, again, an invention of his that's entered our language. One is this doctrine you mentioned of the eternal recurrence of time. And the fourth, I would say, is his notion of the aesthetic understanding of life. Now, let's deal with those in order. Let's talk first about the will to power, which at one time he was going to give as a title to the summation of his life's work. What was this notion of his, the will to power?
Well, he takes the notion of the will from your own special philosopher Schopenhauer, of course, and he reverses the evaluation of that, where Schopenhauer regarded the will as the source of all evil in the world and as the source of man's unhappiness. He regards it as the strength of man's strength, the source of man's strength, and the cultivation, the permission to the will to enact what it can enact is part of a healthy culture. Now, the difficulty there, I think, is that this obviously brings you in conflict with other people, and therefore at this stage the will to power becomes a will to self-assertion, a will to usurpation of the other. But that's not all there is to the will. I think it's to be emphasized, not overemphasized, as some critics have done, but to to be emphasized, that the will to power also turns itself inward, that is to say, it destroys within the self all that is weak, all that is comfortable, all that is simply, part of a man's self-indulgence.
A kind of drastic bringing of oneself up to the mark,
up to the mark, which one has created oneself, and this is the difficult thing
created
about
the mark.
The mark oneself. That's right. Yes.
Well, now let's move on then to the next of the four main themes of his later works, the Superman. Now, everybody knows the word Superman, and it was in fact Nietzsche who invented it. It's been a very much misunderstood concept. People have associated it with the blonde beast of Hitlerian mythology and Nazi caricature. Of course, that's not what he meant at all, was it?
I think that is not what he meant at all. I think the Superman is the man, the production, I mean, who can be produced by any civilization. Remember I said that any era is capable of bringing forth the maximum values that men are capable of. Superman is the man who lives all that the will to power will secure for him, lives it to the full, is capable of repeating his own willing ad infinitum. We're already arriving at the doctrine, at that most controversial of all the things, the most bizarre, if you like, of these views, the eternal recurrence.
Yes, let's get there quite yet, because I want to unpack this notion of the Superman. Which has played such an enormous role in the thought in the last 100 years, and been so abused and misused by the Nazis, for example. Wouldn't it be truer to say that what Nietzsche was actually trying to get at was the notion of an unrepressed man? In, if you like, the Freudian sense, a man who has re-evaluated his values, who is not living his life according to false values, who is being to the top of his bench in an uninhibited, untrammeled, free spirit way. Isn't that rather?
Yes, I think that is so. And but it would be a man who, without, as it were, restricting himself, would naturally, instinctively, not do any of the things that Nietzsche regards as evil. For instance, the one category that he comes out unequivocally in his system is grudgingness, is what he calls ressentiment, is the grudgingness, the grudging admission of warmth, the grudging admission of success, and all these kind of things. Now, the Superman is one who naturally does not feel any of these things. You know the story.
It's the generous spirit.
It is a generous spirit, yes. And there again you see the whole notion of the Christian generous spirit is not all that far from Nietzsche's purview.
Now let us move on to the third of our four main themes, and you've touched on it already, this notion of the eternal recurrence. Now, I would say that, if anything, of all the doctrines of Nietzsche, this is the hardest, not just for people to understand, but even to take seriously. I mean, on the face of it, he appears to be saying that the whole of history moves in epicycles, vast epicycles, so that everything comes round again and again and again forever, so that you and I have actually sat in this studio having this conversation unnumberable times before, and will do so unnumberable times again. Now, is he really saying that?
Well, he's really saying that, and he is trying out what might happen if you took that view seriously. And I think we want to say altogether in our whole discussion that a great deal of his thinking is of this experimental kind. And by that I don't mean that it's not serious, I don't mean that it is not responsible, I don't mean that it is trivial, but I do mean that here's somebody who's facing the whole of human thought and is trying to make some sort of shift with almost any area in it, and is trying out again and again different views. There's a saying of his, I think a very tragic saying of his, in a letter where he writes, I feel as though I were a pen, a new pen, a quill presumably, being tried out by some superior power on a bit of paper. It's a very strange thing to be feeling for somebody who's advocating the will to power and the Superman, and yet I think he did genuinely feel that. Now, he does then try out this thought, and it seems to me not so much a theory of being, not so much a theory of the cosmos, it seems to me a moral theory. That is to say, our actions, our willing, our intentions, our thoughts should be of such a superior kind, of such a grand kind, have such generosity and grandness about them, that we should not flinch to and be able to be willing to repeat them over and over again, ad nauseam, ad infinitum.